and a half weeks, and I'm certainly not bored. I'm working every day, that I have to, and doing weekend stuff on weekends. I just don't go away from the property. But there's so much stuff out there that people can watch and do. There's Netflix and there's gaming, the gaming devices, there's board games and all that sort of stuff. I think what we've actually, as a society, have got into the mindset that we have to be entertained by somebody else. We've forgotten how to entertain ourselves.
Exactly.
Saturday night cards and things like that we used to do when I was a young fellow. Never had TV when I was very young. So you actually did entertain yourself. And there's so much of it around. So getting bored, it's a mindset as opposed to something that's real. Yeah.
Right. And Dougal, you'll be having a staycation as well. I hope you have a good Easter.
Yeah, look, and just picking up on that comment of Chris's about entertaining yourself, I just noticed an article in The Guardian that said sex toy sales in New Zealand have tripled recently. So that might be a way of entertaining yourself and sort of building your own.
I wasn't thinking about that, Dougal. I wasn't thinking about that at all.
Great Easter message, Dougal. Great Easter message. Thank you very much. Clinical psychologist from Victoria University, Dr. Dougal O'Sullivan. Thank you very much for your time. Just a couple of final bits of information, pieces of email here. Mike says, I don't agree with you and the panel on the Prime Minister. She was late to act. She was contradictory, rather weak, and her instruction to be kind was infantile. What about the future economy? Poverty will kill more than the virus. I give her 3 out of 10, says Mike. And Joan says, Wallace, by working tirelessly with experts and the best brains in the country, New Zealand is winning. A big thank you to Jacinda for consulting with professors, scientists, epidemiologists, professional communicators for police, business, etc. And ditto with Professor Michael Baker, Susie Wild, the Director General of Health, and the many whose names elude me. They have engaged us and have taken us along the right path. Bravo, and thank you all for your work. I'm going to go out in a bit of a song, actually. It's Easter, and we're going to kick off. Let's kick off now with this beautiful track. Let's take it back to 1966 with Dionne Warwick. And Chris, Julia, you have a wonderful Easter, huh?
Thank you, and
you too, Wallace.
Good to have you on. Thanks to my producers. See you Tuesday. Stay safe, stay at home, and...
Koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E a haere aki nei, 29 new COVID-19 cases today. The numbers of people who have recovered tops the number of new cases for the first time since the country went into lockdown. A clampdown at the border from midnight tonight. Everyone arriving from overseas will be quarantined for 14 days. Why? We'll have to wait until April 20th to find out if we're moving to alert level 3. And could New Zealand become its own bubble of almost 5 million until a COVID-19 vaccine is developed? The Prime Minister joins us. A damning inquiry into EQC highlights bad communication, botched assessments and repairs, and concerns about the city's housing stock. In the NRL...
The Prime Minister has hailed a turning point in the COVID-19 crisis, with just 29 new cases of the virus today, the lowest daily number since before the lockdown began. The total number of cases in New Zealand now sits at 1,239. Jacinda Ardern says early modelling provided to her suggested that number could be more than 10,000 by now without the action taken.
As a government, we have had pandemic notices. We've had powers that come with being in a national emergency. But you held the greatest power of all. You made the decision that together we could protect one another, and you have. You have saved lives.
But Jacinda Ardern says the lockdown must remain in place for at least another 2 weeks, or New Zealanders risk undoing all their good work so far. Businesses want the government to give clear guidance of what they can expect before the green light is given for trading. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says companies will have 2 days' notice when the decision is made to lift the 4-week lockdown. But the CEO of Business New Zealand, Kirk Hope, says that's a very short notice period. He says businesses need to start thinking about their restart in advance.
They're able to think about what they need to do to mobilise over that 2 days, and that they'll be able to think about how they can operationalise quickly. It's a pretty short space of time, but the reality is many businesses are really keen to get back to business.
Kirk Hope says companies should be in touch with their employees, suppliers and customers ahead of the restart. It's now been revealed 3 nurses working for Waikato DHB have tested positive for coronavirus. It was originally announced that 2 staff members on a ward for older people at Waikato Hospital had contracted the disease. 80 staff have been stood down indefinitely while the Waikato Health Board traces their movements. Some could return next week, but others may have to be off work for 14 days. Health Board Chief Executive Kevin Snee says staff and inpatients on the ward have been contacted and none have any symptoms.
It's obviously a concern if you have COVID-19 and proximity to older people with other comorbidities, so it's critically important that we do track down and test people who've been in contact with the nurses. But to date, we haven't identified any patients with COVID-19.
Dr. Kevin Snee says staff from other wards have been redeployed to make up the shortfall. The police say roadblocks will be in place around the country to prevent non-essential travel this Easter. This morning, 8 vehicles, including camper vans and house buses heading to Nelson, were stopped near Murchison and turned back to Christchurch. Tracy Neal reports.
A checkpoint has also been set up north of Wellington to catch people sneaking away for the long Easter weekend. Media have been invited to visit some of the checkpoints starting tomorrow in Auckland and Christchurch. A police spokesperson says for operational reasons they can't say where other roadblocks might be, but they warn that travelling to and from different towns and cities risks spreading COVID-19 and puts lives at risk. This is Tracy Neal.
A New Zealand military plane will head to Vanuatu later this week, carrying aid supplies and a helicopter to help with the aftermath of Cyclone Harold. Foreign Minister Winston Peters says the Hercules will be loaded with supplies including satellite phones, chainsaws and agricultural kits. It will return with New Zealanders who want to leave Vanuatu after the country closed its borders to keep out COVID-19. Mr. Peters says serious protocols will be applied to ensure support gets to those who need it, while also keeping Vanuatu free of the coronavirus. One of the claimants who contributed to a review of the Earthquake Commission says it's come too late for people like her, but will hopefully prevent anybody else being treated in the same way as she was. The findings released today paint a picture of an organisation completely unprepared to deal with the damage on the scale of the 2010 and 2011 Christchurch earthquakes. They highlight botched assessments and repairs and poor communication. Claimant Susie Hamilton says it took 31 meetings and a 5-year battle with EQC before she was finally able to deal directly with her insurer. She welcomes recommendations in the inquiry that claimants be treated with respect and not re-traumatised by the claims process.
Too late, really, to be of any use to the claimants now. But yes, hopefully it will help going forward.
Susie Hamilton. It's 5:04. To sport now, a leading Australian broadcaster is threatening to walk away from Rugby League's NRL because of the way they've gone about a potential restart to the season. The Nine Network, who has a $1.8 billion deal with the NRL, says it's not happy it hasn't been considered more in the plans to resume the competition. The network is also taking aim at what it calls mismanagement by league executives. The attack comes as the NRL prepares to announce plans for restarting the competition. And the restart of community football has been pushed back, with the national body saying there will be no action until at least the final weekend of May. The lower levels of club and regional football typically begin by mid-April, but New Zealand Football said last month they would postpone the start of the season until May 2nd. However, that date has been pushed back to May 30th at the earliest, with teams prevented from training until May 16. And that's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. Thank you, New Zealand. You've stayed home and you have saved lives. We're not there yet. We need to make sure that we've broken the chain of transmission. You cannot go to your holiday home, batch or crib. The risk of spreading COVID-19 is too high. Police will be on the roads over the weekend to ensure people aren't travelling unnecessarily. All supermarkets will be closed on Good Friday. Some supermarkets will be open on Sunday. Check with your local store to confirm their hours. Unfortunately, you can't physically go to church for Easter services this year. There are options for celebrating Easter safely, such as joining an online or broadcast Easter service. Anyone with COVID-19 symptoms can and should get tested. Contact your GP or Healthline. Go to covid19.govt.nz for more information.
Now, a short forecast from Met Service taking us to midnight tomorrow, Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, occasional showers, clearing in Auckland and Coromandel this evening, becoming mainly fine. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers, some heavy, possibly thundery today, gradually clearing tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty, the central high country, also Waitatapa. Scattered showers, possible thunderstorms, clearing from the south later today, becoming fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, except for Clutha, mainly fine. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, isolated showers about Bulla, clearing to fine tomorrow morning, then cloud developing in the evening. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers easing and retreating to the coast this afternoon, and to Stewart Island and coastal Fiordland tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the chance of a shower tomorrow morning there. Just after 5:07.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, a damning report into EQC, but first, staying home seems to be working. In the past 24 hours, more people have recovered from COVID-19 than have caught it. It's the first time that has happened since New Zealand went into lockdown. The number of coronavirus cases jumped by 29 today, the fourth day in a row that there has been a day-on-day drop. The Prime Minister has announced from midnight tonight everyone arriving from overseas will be quarantined for 14 days. And for the first time today, there was some light at the end of the lockdown tunnel. With news, Cabinet Ministers will decide on April 20th whether the country will drop from Alert Level 4 to Alert Level 3. I spoke with the Prime Minister a few minutes ago and asked her if the decline in cases was cause for celebration.
Cause for cautious optimism, and I think, what we need to do is just keep seeing that trend. We saw the growth, we saw the stabilisation, now we need to keep seeing it come down.
Does it change any of your thinking, that number?
No. The plan has always been to try and get New Zealand into this position. But just because we are on track does not mean that anyone should change their behaviour. In fact, now more than ever, if we want to hold on to the success, we need to keep in level 4 all of the same rules that we have been to date, or we risk being back to the very, very start.
In fact, actually today you've toughened things up. People coming into the country will either be quarantined for 2 weeks or in supervised isolation. A lot of people wonder why you didn't do that earlier.
Well, we were doing that. We actually already have 1,000 people, roughly, who are in what we call this assisted self-isolation and roughly 150 in quarantine. Let me explain the difference, because there's not much of one. Basically, both groups are in hotels. The ones who are quarantined are ones who are being tested for COVID and are symptomatic, so they can't leave their rooms, whereas the others can take a walk around the park or a walk around the block, but nothing else. Now we will be doing that for every New Zealander that comes into the country.
Why not do it sooner?
Well, on the 20th of March, from the 20th of March till now, we've had 40,000 New Zealanders return. We literally could not have done it sooner with that quantum of people coming in, and that's because we haven't had literally the appropriate hotel space to have done this properly and safely with that number. Now our numbers are much smaller. We can do it properly and with everyone.
So you're looking at tracing apps as well and looking to Singapore here. You've got a conversation coming up with the Prime Minister there, Prime Minister Lee. What would you need to hear to push ahead with it?
Well, we already are building an app for New Zealand, but really it's quite basic provision at this point, and then it's a question of what the add-ons are, so whether or not you use GPS or Bluetooth. So what Singapore has been using is a Bluetooth app. People voluntarily sign up to it. Then if they're in contact with someone else who has the app, it can tell that. Not with huge precision, so it's not fail-safe, and it does require wide uptake. So that's going to be open-sourced within the next couple of weeks. We're already talking to the Singapore government about that app and seeing what we can pick up from them and what we can use. But it will never be the golden solution. We need to have people who can still do the job, which is what we've got, which is exactly what's needed.
So it would be voluntary, or would it be mandatory for people to sign up?
voluntary, because these are apps. Whether you're using GPS, whether or not you're using Bluetooth, that really they are keeping a track of who you're in contact with. Now, of course, we would limit it so that information would only ever be used if you tested positive, and then it would then track who you were in contact with and let those people know. So it is a real service, but we do need people to opt in because of what we're asking of them in terms of their information.
I know you are working on what would trigger a shift from level 4 to level 3, but I'm wondering if you could tell us if it is conceivable that various parts of New Zealand could be at a different alert level at the same time. Is that an option you are anticipating?
It's an option we've always left on the table. So the things that we're looking at when we make this decision, which Cabinet will be making on the 20th of April, we'll be looking at what's our rate of transmission. So we, of course, you don't want to ever be in a position where you've got a doubling every 2 or 3 days. That means you're in a very bad place. What's happening with our clusters and community transmission, and do we have enough data at a regional level to give us confidence that we know exactly what's going on there? We've always said there might be a possibility of some parts of the country coming out of level 4 and others not. What we're really working through is could we do that successfully? So really getting into some of that detail around how you might enforce regions being at different levels. So we've left that possibility open.
Do you think it's realistic to isolate some cities and not others?
I do think it's something that we want to keep on the table as an option because we always want to affect as few people as possible with such restrictive requirements as we have currently at level 4. And so I think it's only right that we consider, look, if we've only got an outbreak in one part of the country, do we want the entire country at that point to be in a full lockdown? But we've also got to make it work. And freight moves across our country as much as, as our people do, of course. So that's why we're really drilling into how well it would work if we operated like that.
And at some point, could it be an option where New Zealand is basically in its own bubble? If we get the number of cases down low enough that everybody is free to move around New Zealand, but you just keep our border locked down?
And borders will be key. And so there is a possibility that will be our one risk point. So we continue to have a very, very tight border control system, which we've now implemented. And if we can get down into a place where we haven't got cases that are prevalent, but we still have rigorous contact tracing and isolation for when we do, then we can lift those, and ease those restrictions. And that's what we're all working towards. So it is conceivable that that could happen.
So we could basically have a New Zealand-wide bubble, just no one coming in from the outside who's not a Kiwi.
Well, or who doesn't have, who can't show that they've got antibody, or that hasn't come in and quarantined. I think we will have to continue to have measures that can show that people, when they come in, are safe and aren't bringing in COVID-19.
And would that be until there is a vaccine?
At the moment, yes. That is ultimately either we see COVID go the way of SARS, which is that it was seasonal, or, of course, we see vaccine rapidly produced. I think the entire world will have to manage COVID until that time. What we need to do, of course, is keep making sure that we're using every possibility we have to have the smartest border that we can in the world. And we have smart borders today when it comes to biosecurity. Now we need to add to that a smart border when it comes to managing COVID-19.
I want to talk about business because obviously a lot of businesses are suffering under this particular lockdown. Phil O'Reilly was calling earlier in the week for cash injections to businesses. Is that under active consideration?
So we opted, those countries who have used cash injections, the closest example would probably be Australia. They had a varied but capped cash payment in the beginning, and then you saw down the track, as they moved to heavier restrictions, you saw them come in with a form of wage subsidy. So we went straight to the wage subsidy. Our view was it gave us the ability to be more generous and make sure that we were helping employers hold on to their employees. couple that with their other big overheads. We're working on issues around commercial lease arrangements, and also, obviously, servicing debt is a big issue for businesses. So we've talked with the banks about the work they can do on hardship and working alongside the businesses who bank with them. So that, I hope, is addressed, at least in some parts, some of those three really difficult areas for them.
Will there be anything more for business next week?
We're constantly working on making sure that as much as we're able to support business through this period of what will for many be hibernation. You've seen us work on insolvency. We've been working on commercial rents, leases, and we've also always said that for those larger employees, we may work on bespoke initiatives to keep them ticking over. So you can expect to keep hearing about those.
Prime Minister, is a couple of days, is 2 days enough warning for businesses in terms of if the lockdown is to come off?
Actually, that'll be just notice of whether we're changing the level. We do want to give as much preparation time as possible for what those different alert levels mean. And so next week we will be going through in more detail exactly what alert level 3 will look like to help with that preparation. But what we're asking all businesses now to think about is in a situation where you are able to open again, what kind of social distancing can you build into your workplace, if any? Can you help if we have a situation where an employee or customer needs to be traced? What kind of contact tracing can you help us with? What kind of PPE might you need to use? Those are basic now, new health and safety requirements. So planning for that will ultimately really help when it comes to starting up again.
Understood.
And then on the 20th...
But the stock issue, Prime Minister, like with cafes, fresh food businesses, things like that, where stock costs them a lot of money and could go to waste if the decision doesn't go their way.
And so I wouldn't, in those areas where you do have shorter shelf lives for product, I would definitely urge that they wait until there is an announcement. We will use real-time data, but we share the data we get within a couple of hours of receiving it. We put it into the public domain. So you'll see the signs at the same time we will, and we will give the longest warning we can, but we ultimately don't want to move too soon or we risk going backwards.
There were 22,000 applications for benefits in the first week of lockdown, and you talk about sharing the signs. So what is Treasury telling you about the forecast? What can you expect around unemployment?
So one of the things that we've said that we'll do is start moving to, because of course there's a difference between forecasting and the real data that we get. And so forecasting is, as you can imagine, quite difficult at the moment. But we will start sharing some of that data weekly from work and income. So that'll give a bit of a sense of how things are tracking. And so last week the number of people on a benefit increased by 10,000. So we know, of course, that there has been a huge impact for those in the workforce. Equally, 1 million New Zealanders are also receiving the wage subsidy.
Prime Minister, have any other leaders from around the world got in contact with you to ask advice and to ask about why and how you have done things here?
I'd say I describe it less as advice and more of just an exchange of what we're doing and what's working and the different things that we are experiencing.
So who's called you then?
I had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Sweden last night. I'm talking with the Prime Minister of Singapore in just a few short minutes. But that's us sharing ideas rather than necessarily saying whatever we're doing can just be replicated elsewhere, because our populations are different and our ways of life are different too.
But is there a curiosity about how we are doing and the numbers that we are seeing?
Yes, I think so. But equally, I have a curiosity about others too. And so I think we're all sharing right now, and that's as it should be.
Just before you go, possibly the most important question I can ask, does the Easter Bunny know where your place is?
Thankfully, Neve doesn't know what the Easter Bunny is yet, so I'm just gonna stick with that at the moment.
And what about?
But you will see, we will have eggs up in the window, just because, of course, that was something that we wanted to see out in everyone's neighbourhood, and we'll be joining in.
What about the carpet cleaners? Do they know where your place is?
Thankfully, I know a few home remedies, and I can tell you that vinegar works quite well on a black vivid.
And that was Jacinda Ardern speaking. The reference to the Black Vivid, well, Neve had a bit of a, mishap with the Black Vivid while drawing a picture of the Easter Bunny on the carpet at Premier House. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What do you make about the tougher stance at the border? And we will find out on the 20th of April what's going to happen with lockdown. What are you anticipating? What would you like to see? The chair of the inquiry into the Earthquake Commission has grave concerns about the state of the housing stock in Christchurch due to EQC's failure to properly fix quake damage. It's just one of a raft of findings released by Dame Sylvia Cartwright today after a 1.5-year-long inquiry that heard from hundreds of homeowners and key players. Conan Young has the story.
The findings paint a picture of an organisation completely unprepared to deal with damage on the scale of the 2010 and 2011 earthquakes. The 246-page report released this morning after a 16-month public inquiry into EQC highlight botched assessments and repairs and poor communication with customers. Dame Sylvia says it wasn't given the all-of-government support it needed and was left to get on with assessing damage and overseeing a gigantic home repair program despite its lack of expertise. Claimant Susie Hamilton was one of those who talked to the inquiry and says it took 31 meetings and a 5-year battle with EQC before she was finally deemed over cap and able to deal directly with her insurer.
The attitude at the beginning was great because they had trained people who had come from Australia, but as they got less experienced people, it became just impossible to work with them to the point where on one of the last meetings, the girl that I was dealing with said that the property shouldn't have even been insured. It was in such a poor state because it was 6 years after the earthquakes and, of course, the property was just being degraded all the time.
Susie Hamilton's partner at the time was terminally ill, meaning they were dealt with as a vulnerable client, but she says the whole process left her feeling exhausted and embittered. She's glad Dame Sylvia is recommending claimants are treated by EQC with respect and not re-traumatised by the claims process.
Too late, really, to be of any use to the claimants now, but yes, hopefully it will help going forward.
While Susie Hamilton's claim was eventually settled, damage to an as-yet unknown number of homes was never identified by EQC, with Dame Sylvia saying she has grave concerns about the quality of the city's housing stock. She says there are innumerable instances of damage being missed and repairs being botched, and worries much of this won't be discovered until people come to sell their houses. Then there are the homes being sold as is where is, given cosmetic repairs and on-sold to unsuspecting buyers. Claimant and advocate Ellie Jones says the 800 on-sold properties we know about that need fixing would be a prime candidate for some of the money the government is looking to spend to boost the economy once we come out of lockdown.
Let's use that. Let's use the recommendations from this report to help inform a good home repair program, an effective home repair program, and let's get the builders and construction industry working again.
While she says the organisation has undergone massive changes under the Labour coalition government, there are still some inside the organisation who need to go.
They're referring to court cases that they shouldn't be referring to. They're irrelevant. They're referring to repair methodologies that are not correct. They're questioning engineering reports when there isn't, the veracity in their position to question that report. So, I think the cultural issue and some of the barriers that remain in EQC are the biggest problem moving forward.
Amongst its dozens of recommendations, the inquiry proposes either raising the $150,000 cap, after which private insurance kicks in, or doing away with it completely so that EQC would pay out the entire sum insured amount on a property. Claimant Susie Hamilton says based on its previous record, she'd be reluctant to hand over this much responsibility to EQC.
I just don't see that they could possibly manage it, and I would much prefer that it would have gone straight to the insurer, and I still think that the insurers are much better able to deal with the process than a government department like the EQC.
Rebuild Minister Megan Woods says a lot of the recommendations have already been implemented.
We've put in place the fund so that we can deal with the on-sold property issue, and of course the re-repairs for those repairs that weren't done correctly in the first place. I think the report calls them botched repairs, still continue to come in, and those repairs are still being carried out.
Megan Woods says the government will now carefully consider the recommendations before conducting its own review of the EQC Act next year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Koninyang tēnei.
And we'll speak with Dame Sylvia Cartwright after 6 o'clock tonight. There have been long lines at supermarkets around the country today ahead of their closure tomorrow for Good Friday. This is despite the Prime Minister saying supermarkets will reopen on Saturday and be open on Easter Sunday. Our reporter Logan Church is outside Wellington City's New World and joins us live. Hi Logan, I'm just wondering, can you give us an idea of how busy it is down there when that fire truck gets past you? I can see a couple of people if they're watching. We can see a bit of a queue snaking around there. Give us an idea of how far it goes. How many people are we talking?
Hi Lisa, it's really quite incredible. We're standing on Schaefer Street, which is at the far end of the Wellington City New World, and behind me the lines get into the store, snakes out the front door, down the front of the store, up Wakefield Street, down Schaefer Street where we're standing, and now it's actually curling around Cable Street, which is at the end of Schaefer Street here. We estimate at least 50 if not 60 people are in the line here, and it's growing minute by minute. Of course, this is not the only supermarket in New Zealand which has seen long queues today. We've seen reports all over the country of people coming out in force to shop ahead of the closures tomorrow. Of course, supermarkets will not be open tomorrow being Good Friday. Now, the Prime Minister says some supermarkets will be able to open on Sunday, so people will only have to deal with not going to the stores for one day. They'll be shut for just one day. But the messages from Foodstuffs, who own New World and Pack and Save and Countdown, is really to shop normal. And if everyone does that, then there will be plenty of food to go around for everyone this long weekend.
I see while you've been talking, that line has barely moved. People have taken about 1 or 2 steps forward. But I have to say, they are exercising some good social distancing there, aren't they, Logan?
They certainly are. Everyone is keeping their 2 metres distance, and actually just before we saw the police come in and do a few circuits around the car park to make sure everyone was behaving. I also drove past plenty of the other supermarkets in Wellington on the way in today, and everyone across the board seemed to be sticking to the rules. Of course, on all the doors to the supermarkets, all the workers are making sure that people are coming in either small groups, or as a few come in, a few go out, and inside the stores they've been told to stay at least 2 metres away, and in many supermarkets follow a line around the shop to avoid as much contact as possible, or ideally have no contact of anyone at all.
OK, so this isn't really an ordinary Easter, and we're all under strict warnings to stay at home. Police have been out in full force today, haven't they?
Yes, they've been setting up checkpoints, essentially making sure that people don't go sneaking off to their beaches or on holidays, as many people would normally do at this time of year. Our cameraman, Dom, who's holding the camera in front of me, he went and visited one of the checkpoints just north of Wellington, north of Plimmerton. And there the police were directing traffic onto what's usually a truck weigh station. There they were greeted by a line of 10 police officers and were told, and basically were asked where they were going. Their details were checked because the police can see what their addresses are when they put their names into the databases, and they were really just making sure that everyone was doing what they should, and that is staying home at this time. Now, at that checkpoint, the police said that at least up until when RNZ visited, everyone was obeying the rules, and everyone coming up State Highway 1 out of Wellington were essential workers. But that hasn't been the case over all of the country. Down in the South Island, the police say they have turned away at least 8 groups who were trying to get out of Christchurch, and they've been turned around and sent back home. So the message from police this Easter is stay home, enjoy staying at home, and stay off the roads if possible.
Thanks, Logan. That's Logan Church outside Wellington City's New World. And if you're watching that on the television, wow, there was a steady stream of cars going into that car park to do their shopping. up on Checkpoint on RNZ National. Restaurants say they'll need more than a couple of days' notice to reopen after the lockdown. Will the NRL go ahead in Australia with or without the Warriors? A decision is expected shortly. And the lockdown diaries of two families as we head into Easter, this staycation. We'd love your feedback. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. How are you keeping yourselves amused this Easter? Let's get to the headlines now with Paul Brennan.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister says New Zealanders have saved lives by staying at home, as the country announced just 29 new cases of COVID-19 today. It's the lowest daily number since before the lockdown began. The total number of cases in New Zealand now sits at 1,239. Businesses want the government to give clear guidance of what they can expect before the green light is given for trading. New Zealanders will learn just 2 days before the 4-week lockdown is due to end whether it will be extended. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint the government will use real-time data and give as much notice as it can before dropping to alert level 3. Air New Zealand says up to 1,460 cabin crew jobs will be axed. In an email sent to staff today, the company says it's burning through $14 million a month in crew salaries. Air New Zealand says it expects to be around 30% smaller than it was before the COVID-19 crisis. A claimant who contributed to a review of the Earthquake Commission says she hopes it will prevent anybody else being treated in the same way as she was. The findings released today highlight botched assessments and repairs and poor communication in relation to the damage caused by the Christchurch earthquakes. Susie Hamilton told Checkpoint it became impossible to deal with inexperienced staff at the EQC, and she thinks the insurers are much better able to deal with the process. 3 nurses working for Waikato DHB have tested positive for coronavirus. 80 staff have been stood down indefinitely, while the Waikato Health Board traces their movements. And a New Zealand military plane will head to Vanuatu later this week carrying aid supplies and a helicopter to help with the aftermath of Cyclone Harold. The MP for the town of Luganville says up to 70% of buildings have been destroyed by the Category 5 cyclone. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, Air New Zealand, some more bad news there. What is the latest?
Yeah, up to 1,460 cabin crew jobs will go, according to an email that Air New Zealand sent out to that crew today. That's mostly because the airline is saying that the airline, once all of this is said and done, they'll be about 30% smaller than they are today. And at the moment, they're going through about $14 million a month in salaries to crew. So more details will be known about this over the next 2 weeks while they negotiate with union members, and those on all individual contracts will be contacted directly by the airline. So exactly how many jobs and what kinds of aircraft will be affected, that's still to be determined. But at the moment, it's not great news for their staff. On the other hand, the market kind of seemed to react reasonably positive. In fact, if it isn't this news that caught their eye, the share price there rose 8% today.
And there's more economic data really confirming what we suspect and know, that spending is down. But what are the numbers?
So electronic cards, which basically we're talking credit, debit cards, accounts for about 2/3 of all consumer spending. And it shows that where it comes to accommodation and restaurant meals, like meals out, $340 million down. So spending, that contributed to a drop of 3.9% on the month before. So these are March numbers, and this is over February. It's a hefty fall. On the upside, supermarket shopping was up 18%, not surprising, to $315 million. It's quite a lot of money. And
a lot of groceries there, Nona.
A lot of groceries, big queues, as you know. Anyway, so overall, our market it ended down today, but not as like yesterday. We were up to 2.3. So today we're down 0.7 cents and 7% rather. That's a 68-point drop to 9,964. Our dollar's a little bit stronger. We're at 60.1 US cents. 96.6 Australian, and we're steady at 48.5 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news. Restaurants are chomping at the bit to reopen when we move out of level 4, but warn we shouldn't expect them to be up and running as soon as the lockdown ends. The Prime Minister has asked businesses to prepare to reopen, but says a decision on when the lockdown is lifted will only be made on April 20th, 2 days before it's due to finish. And there's still uncertainty over how businesses will be able to operate under Alert Level 3. Lydia Batham has more.
2 weeks ago, as we entered Alert Level 4, restaurants around the country closed their doors. With no money coming in, Marissa Bidwar, who's the CEO of the Restaurant Association, says many are eager to reopen as soon as they can.
Because it's really imperative that they have some revenue flowing into their business to assist with ongoing overheads and whatnot that businesses are continuing to pay even during this current lockdown.
But she says they don't know what the lay of the land will be in 2 weeks' time.
I'm Krishna Bodhika. I'm the director of the Comensa Group, which has Cafe Hanoi and Susu Dumpling Bar down in Britomart, San Restaurant up in Ponsonby.
2 weeks' time, we should be out of level 4 lockdown. How easy will it be for you to reopen your restaurants at that time?
Well, it's entirely dependent on the clarity around what restaurants can do at level 3 in regards to takeaways and contactless delivery. So we're hoping that we can do delivery, contactless delivery, and that would be ideal for us, just at least to get some revenue through the door, and certainly not where we were at.
Today, the Prime Minister announced more information will be provided next week about what can open under Alert Level 3. But the decision to move to that level will be made later.
Cabinet will make a decision on our next steps. That's because we need to use the most up-to-date data that we have to make that decision. That means if we are ready to move to Alert Level 3, business will have 2 days to implement arrangements.
Krishna Bodhika says her restaurants could be back up and running pretty quickly.
As soon as our suppliers are ready, there's their logistics side of things. I'd say some of our meat produce suppliers will already be ready to go pretty much within a day or so. Fruit and vegetable suppliers have let us know it'll take them a few days to get up and running. Up until that point, we'll probably be sourcing our own fruit and vegetables to hopefully get open within a day and a half. Then we would hope to be up and running by Friday night.
But Shan Shiravatz, who's the co-owner of Cassia, Siddard and Sid at the French Cafe, says they're weighing up whether it's worth opening that week, given it's Anzac Day. She also has concerns about supplies.
There are national shortages of things like ginger and garlic. Either they're really expensive or they're not going to be available. We're not seeing much of them. So we're talking to our suppliers right now because we own 2 of our 3 restaurants are Indian in cuisine, and ginger and garlic are vital, for example. So we don't know if we're going to be able to get those things. It would take us about two days to restock and reset the restaurant, dust everything off, do the whole COVID clean down so that we could open or start cooking food.
Then there's the question of when they'll be able to bring staff on site.
We don't know when she does announce on the 20th, are we allowed to go before the 23rd to start the process of reopening the restaurants, or we have to wait until the 23rd.
Her restaurants are predominantly dine-in, so they've been working hard to change to a takeaway delivery service with the aim to keep as many staff on as possible.
We're going to be making our front-of-house staff essentially delivery drivers where we can. They'll probably be using e-scooters, and those who have driver's licenses will be driving and doing deliveries.
Even then, the books won't look the same.
So we're estimating that we would only be making 25% of the revenue we used to make when we reopen at level 3. So it's about making some revenue and connecting with our customers. It's not about making money.
And if we move back up to level 4 again, Marissa Bidwar warns it could be devastating.
If we returned back to, say, a level 4 lockdown situation, it could potentially be catastrophic for some businesses.
So Krishna Bodhika hopes the government would consider adjusting the rules under level 4 a bit.
A-grade businesses who already have proven food hygiene accreditation should be allowed to open, but not necessarily the B's, C's or the D's. We already are assessed on our food hygiene criteria, and we're ready for That's what food businesses do.
While many restaurants are doing all they can to be able to provide us food when we move to level 3, don't expect to be ordering a takeaway the first night we're out of lockdown. For Checkpoint, Lydia Batham.
One of Auckland's famous shopping strips, Dominion Road, is showing the signs of stress as for sale and for lease signs start filling shop windows. It's a vibrant, bustling stretch of road full of cheap and cheerful businesses. But like everywhere, it's dead, and business owners say they are losing thousands of dollars a week. Sharon Brett-Kelly takes a walk down Dominion Road and talks to some of the owners.
I'm standing outside Cole's Cobble Shop, and it's a little old-fashioned business that fixes things like boots and bags and belts. The owner, Colin Wiggs, been here for 45 years. What does it feel like now to be in lockdown? I mean, you wouldn't have been in this kind of situation before, would you?
No, I haven't before. But it's actually quite nice to not have to go to work. I've quite enjoyed the last 2 weeks. The money ran out last week as well, so, that's also a problem, but, I've got a bit of savings to live on.
Cole's Cobble Shop is tucked in between Metropolitan Rentals, which I'm told is the longest surviving business on Dominion Road. It's a place where you can rent vans and trucks. Right next to it is a big empty shop that's for lease. There's a lot of shops along here that have for lease signs, but it's a real mix of businesses along this road. And Gary Holmes, the manager of Dominion Road Business Association, calls the strip the world on one street.
Because it's got so much diversity and variety, both in terms of ethnicity and ethnic representation, and also the types of businesses that we have along Dominion Road.
There's more than 200 businesses along this stretch, and they really are a quirky mix of Chinese restaurants, cafes, banks, antique shops, charity stores. I'm going across the road now to the tapas bar Tusker to talk to the owners Michelle and Ali Hassan.
It's going to be very, very hard times in front of us. At the moment, we locked down, can't do anything, but we still want to survive. We've had this business for 13 years almost, and we have responsibilities to our employees. And there was our baby. We started up from scratch, so we don't want to lose our business. It's a little bit tough for us, to be honest, and I usually don't talk about this sort of stuff, but we're finding it tough, and it's going to be even tougher.
A lot of these shops have the standard COVID-19 notice on their windows. Mr. Howe's Barbecue Chinese restaurant is a bit different. It only opened a few weeks before lockdown, but the owner, Paul Wong, also owns restaurants in China, so he knows what it's like to survive a shutdown.
So basically when we shut down here, I was able to reopen over there.
And things went straight back to normal over there?
So it's been a slow progression. I'd say now that we're maybe 30-40% down on normal business. But it's during this stage we weren't forced to shut. We're actually forced to open because we're in some bigger shopping malls over there. But there was literally nobody at all in the shopping centre, like a big shopping centre, one of the biggest ones in Shanghai, and it was literally like a ghost town.
So your experience here must be quite different.
Oh, very different. The Chinese people are a lot more worried about the virus before, so a lot of them, like as soon as the story came out over there, a lot of them stopped going out anyway. So the business had already dropped a lot more than in New Zealand.
My last call is to Chris Hammonds. He's the chair of the Dominion Road Business Association, and his business, Mondo Travel, is a few blocks further south.
I worked out today that just to be alive is costing me about $1,000 a day after the subsidy on salaries and rent and all that sort of carry on. So after 12 weeks, that's $60,000. There's not a lot of small businesses that have got equity to sort of sustain themselves. I'm fortunate that I've been around for a while, that I do have, but the longer this thing goes on, the harder it's going to be to survive, that's for sure.
Dominion Road is bending under its own weight.
Or that's what it's like in normal times, but these aren't normal times. Colin Wiggs says he'll be starting from scratch when he's allowed back into his cobble shop, and Chris and Ali from Tusker have plans to shake things up a bit.
We are starting some new services, like we will do a takeout service for people that perhaps will stay at home rather than go in dining.
And Chris Hammond says he'll be relying on his loyal customers to help pull him through.
They've been fantastic, actually. I get clients ringing me all the time to make sure I'm okay, which is a very nice thing. And I've got a lot of loyal clients, and they really appreciate the fact that we're helping them out. And so I've got clients for life in regards to that. And so, yeah, we'll get back out and we'll get back into it again. We've just got to hunker down for a time. But then it could mean in a different shape and form. And right, you know, we had 5 staff in the office. Now I'm down to 4.
From Dominion Road for Checkpoint, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly.
And it's 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's bubbles o'clock with the 2 families keeping video diaries for us during lockdown. Last week, 73-year-old retiree Tricia was battling to keep happy hour at a respectable hour in her bubble of 3 just out of Wellington. And the Oliver family of Pukekohe is juggling work from home, schooling 3 older children and wrangling the dynamo that is 2-year-old Kenny. This week in the Bubble Diaries, the Oliver parents get a serve.
We wanted to share a letter with you that our daughter wrote us.
And further south, the dirty washing's coming out.
With more than 2 weeks of the lockdown to go, it didn't seem to be the right time to have a bit of an argument with the neighbours, particularly when they're not mine.
Day 8, the Olivers are still rising to the challenge of confinement. Here's 12-year-old Atalia.
And we've been spending lots of time in the kitchen lately. We've been doing lots of baking and cooking. And today I took a break from online learning so I could pull out this bread that I made earlier.
A sunshine-coloured rustic cob loaf freshly turned out on the bench in front of her. It's so familiar you can almost smell it through your TV or radio. And it smells like harmony. For now. Just out of Wellington, familiar routines and comforts are starting to evade Tricia in her little bubble.
Put a little bit of makeup on each day for as long as the stocks last. But then there was the question of touching your face. They suddenly came out and said we weren't to touch our face to avoid spreading the virus even further. Then, of course, there's the whole problem of hair. What to do about our hair when it keeps growing, because it's going to start to look like Boris Johnson's.
Day 9 and this normally keen news hound can smell her own indifference.
Today is Friday, although I had to check in my calendar to be sure. It's funny how you just lose track of the time. Before, I used to really look forward to Fridays.
AKA Digital Delivery Day for The Economist mag.
I must admit now I really couldn't care less, and I've probably got at least 2 weeks' worth of the magazine to catch up on.
Instead, opting for online German lessons. Ach du liebe Zeit.
We'll just listen to the voice. Die Frau. Well, I should be able to get this right by now. And you'll see a nice ping goes of the bell and a nice green light, and on we go to the next one.
Tricia is not the only one slogging it out online.
Starting with our myth,
3 of the Olivers are device deep in schoolwork.
So, Lani, what are you missing about school so far?
My friends.
What do you not like about online school?
I get headaches from too much technology and my eyes start to hurt.
Dad Dan goes to the lounge mat, to give his best explanation of an incomprehensible maths lesson.
And you simplify this expression to that. So how can you use this to simplify that?
He says that it gets worse.
Even I can work out the square root of this one. It's frustration.
I have been really surprised too at the commitment that I've had to give to online schooling. What you doing?
Cleaning.
Day 10 is Saturday. That just means swapping one chore for another. The Oliver girls are cleaning windows and doing the washing. It counts towards school credits and a life lesson too. Mum is not your maid.
I've put together a schedule with who was cleaning what, emptying the dishwasher, bringing the washing down, vacuuming, because I just knew that it would not work if all the cleaning and the cooking was going to fall on me. So we're all cleaning this morning.
And just when the day couldn't get any better, the violin teacher beams in via a propped-up iPad. Each bow stroke stings like lemon juice to the cut. Further south, the weekend goes by in a blur of chutney wrestling, so not what you think.
So there I was, my son busy talking to his boss on the phone, me trying to gesticulate, could he just open the jar of chutney? But I have to say, in the end, I gave up and resorted to mustard.
And dirty laundry, because everyone has some.
I must say, hanging it out this morning was accompanied by very loud music from the neighbours.
By day 11, there is a common theme. If you have a last nerve, someone's keen to get on it. That's the soothing sound of 2-year-old Kenny Oliver's ride-on truck as he barrels into the side of the family home in Pukekohe, symbolic, perhaps, of another gnarl-up looming. A tired-looking mum, Leslie Ali, explains.
Kids have been annoying each other all morning. They have been getting on each other's nerves. So then we decided we would send them for a run. The run is probably around about 800 metres, so I'm just waiting at the end of the driveway for them to get back.
As Mum films, the 3 girls file down the driveway one by one.
Come on!
She gets the stink eye and then a protest letter from their 8-year-old.
Dear Mum and Dad, I have 10 things to say that you did to my day. Starting with Mum. Number 1, you ignored me when I was crying. I couldn't talk to you because you were rude. You know what? I will make that 3 things for the both of you.
So what are your thoughts on lockdown right so far with kids?
The house feels a lot smaller, with 6 of us stuck inside of it. How about you?
We're only up to day 11. I actually feel like we're running out of ideas of things to do. I personally myself...
Constantly running out of food too.
Yeah, feeling quite bored, and so it's a bit of a challenge trying to keep a good attitude.
In our other bubble, 73-year-old retiree Tricia is taking stock too of her beloved fizzy, whatever gets you through.
To my great relief, when I looked in the cupboard in the laundry, I found not only had I got a 30-pack of Coke, but I'd also got an 18-pack of Coke. Now, this wasn't panic buying, this is my normal stockpile.
Tricia's in a bubble of 3. Time to muse on that choice.
Who would I most like to be in my bubble with and who would I least like to be in my bubble with? I didn't even have to hesitate before the word Trump came out of my mouth. I just loathe that man. I'd also hate to be in a bubble with that corporate voice that you hear when you phone a company and you're told you're a very valuable customer and you're 15th in line. When you're checking your mobile answer phone messages and they say there's 5 new messages, first new message. And I would like to add Jamie Oliver, because I'm a terrible cook.
Kenny, what are you doing up there?
In Pukekohe, 2-year-old Kenny is scaling the pantry like Spider-Man. Like any 2-year-old, he's busy making imaginary phone calls, holding a coffee party, out shouting, talking Tom, the virtual pet, and choreographing a dinosaur war.
Why are you grumpy? You going to tell Mummy why you're grumpy today? Say good night. Say night-night.
No naps for Mum and Dad, who dodge all the daytime distractions by pulling a night shift.
We've got some really good work done during that time, and so it's close to midnight now, so we're about to go to bed.
While they get some shut-eye, let's leap forward to day 14. Tricia is quietly putting it all in perspective as she reflects on her old pre-lockdown life when she was an active volunteer teaching refugees to drive.
I kept in touch with one of the families from the Middle East who's the wife I was teaching to drive and got on particularly well with. And I always remember once asking her what she most liked about living in New Zealand, and she just said waking up in the morning and finding she was still alive.
Puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? Well, step away from the camper van, put the tent back in the cupboard and rid yourself of any suggestion you might be headed away on an Easter holiday this weekend. Police have already had to deal with a few folk towing boats with ideas of their own. And joining me now is Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers. Good evening. I know it's too early for the numbers, but give us an idea of what sort of thing you're seeing at checkpoints.
Well, Lisa, yes, the police have been out in force across the country today, hundreds of checkpoints, and sadly, some just still don't get it. We've had people towing their boats up in Northland. We've had people heading to the west coast down in the South Island with their cars loaded up and their families off for a nice weekend. We've had people trying to sneak into their batches during the night in Mahia. We've had the Maritime Police up in Auckland having a chat to some kite surfers and other swimmers out there. So, the vast majority of New Zealanders are doing the right thing, but sadly there's just some that just don't get it.
So what do they say when you stop them? Because it's pretty obvious what they're up to.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get all sorts of excuses, of course, as you can appreciate. There's some who genuinely think that they don't know what's expected. I sort of question that. I think we've had a tremendous amount of commentary out publicly about expectations under Alert Level 4. And there's a bunch of people who we think they perhaps think they're above it and they're a bit different, and then they'll try it on. So, we'll deal with those. I mean, the vast majority we come across are cooperative and compliant and then decide to do the right thing after having a chat with us. But there's a few that don't get it, and we'll use the full force of the law to help them with that. And we've prosecuted a few already for ignoring the expectation.
Richard, you mentioned Mahi, I think it was, where someone was sort of going stealthily in the night to a batch, was it?
Yeah, well, look, we are getting wonderful support from the community. So obviously the police out there doing their thing is, that's one thing. That's just what we do, right? But the support that we're getting from the community when they see something that's not quite right, when they see people sneaking into their batches or out and about doing things, we're getting those phone calls as well, and we'll act on them. And, as an example, Mahi, we ended up visiting a few people this morning and sent them on their way back home where they should be.
Because we've just had a text in from Murray. He lives in Whitianga and says, he's asking, are you going to be on roadblocks during the night? Whispers have come in that out-of-towners are moving in during the hours of darkness here on the Coromandel. So will you have checkpoints outside of daylight hours?
Yeah, we've got checkpoints across the country. District commanders are leading those, and they will decide when to put those checkpoints in place. But I would suggest that it'd be very wrong for anyone to assume that it's going to just be happening in daylight.
Are these Kiwis or permanent residents, or are some of these tourists?
No, there are a few tourists there as well who are moving around, but again, the guidelines have been very clear. For instance, camper vans, if you're in one, stay in one and don't move. But many of the people that we've come across today are Kiwis, and as I say, let's not lose sight of the fact the vast majority of New Zealanders are doing the right thing. It's just a few that are letting us all down.
Okay, well, we can't say it too often, so I'm going to give you a chance. What is the advice to people? Tell them again.
The advice is stay home and save lives, because we all want the situation to end well. But those who are out ignoring the instructions and expectations, and expect a visit from us if you're going to try it on. But thank you to all of those people who are doing the right thing.
Any ones from these checkpoints so far that are going to be taken further than a warning?
Yes, we have. As of this morning, we've got 61 prosecutions. That's up sort of 16 from yesterday. So under the law, we are able to prosecute someone for failing to comply with the expectations of the health notice and the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act. And that's our last resort. We don't want to end up prosecuting people, but if they just don't get it, if they don't understand what's expected and they continue to ignore our advice, then we've really left with no option to act in the interest of the community.
Appreciate your time. That is Richard Chambers, who is the Assistant Police Commissioner. They're talking about the checkpoints. He was saying 61 prosecutions going ahead for people who are bucking the rules of the lockdown. And interestingly, he mentioned that nighttime, someone trying to get into their batch at Mahia by stealth. So hopefully that answers your question, Murray, who's got in contact from Whitianga, who is concerned that people are moving in after dark. Someone else on other topic about the Prime Minister says, I feel so proud of the Prime Minister's calm, reassuring leadership and the government's steady, informed response to the COVID-19 crisis. I am also proud of how the majority of New Zealanders have responded and rallied to do what is needed in these challenging times. That's from Leanne in Wellington. And just quickly, some people have said it's the second day the new cases were fewer than the number of recoveries. And that was Ashley Bloomfield who made that statement in his press conference. But we've gone back and fact-checked it for you, and you were right. Claire is one of the people who came in. It is the second time that's happened.
RNZ News at 6. No mai, haere mai. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister insists that a tight border is key to keeping COVID-19 out of the country. The government has announced that all travellers arriving from overseas will be put into either quarantine or managed isolation at an approved facility for 14 days. Jacinda Ardern's told Checkpoint that the borders are our biggest risk, and even one person slipping through the cracks with the virus could cause an explosion of cases.
What we need to do, of course, is keep making sure that we're using every possibility we have to have the smartest border in the world. And we have smart borders to date when it comes to biosecurity. Now we need to add to that a smart border when it comes to managing COVID-19.
Jacinda Ardern. Nearly 40,000 New Zealanders have returned home since March the 20th. Air New Zealand says up to 1,460 cabin crew jobs will be axed. In an email sent to staff today, the company says it's burning through $14 million a month in crew salaries. Air New Zealand says it expects to be around 30% smaller than it was before the COVID-19 crisis. It says firmer details will be revealed after consultation with unions, which is expected to take around 2 weeks. An Auckland man who's among one of the largest clusters of COVID-19 cases in the country says it's been an incredibly tough time. Jeff Mulianga Brown was an MC and his daughter was in the Samoan group at the Marist College Fia night last month. Mr. Mulianga Brown says he started feeling ill 6 days later and tested positive in hospital after being admitted in a deteriorating condition.
But, I was angry. I was angry about the process. I was angry about what happened to me, and I wouldn't want it to happen to other people, and imagine if they were older. Imagine it was a lomakua or a koinga, an older person, elderly person, or someone without no car, no money, or no phone.
Jeff Mulianga Brown recovering from COVID-19 in isolation at home. There are currently 12 significant clusters, including 84 cases linked to the college. A group of New Zealanders stuck on the Greg Mortimer cruise ship in Uruguay will be allowed to board an Australian evacuation flight. More than half of the 217 passengers and crew on board the ship have tested positive for COVID-19. The ship's operator, Aurora Expeditions, says Australians will be evacuated on Thursday or Friday. RNZ understands there are 16 New Zealand citizens on board and they will be let on a flight from Montevideo to Australia. Wellington's Inter-Islander terminal has been named the preferred location for a single multi-user ferry terminal. The Greater Wellington and Horizons regional councils want development to push forward on the Inter-Islander site at Kaiwharawhara after it scored best out of 4 possible sites. Darren Ponter of Greater Wellington Regional Council says the project group also looked at Kings Wharf, Aotea Wharf and the Container Wharf, but they weren't suitable.
It will hugely disrupt the port's business to look at the other 3 options, and we're not willing to have those activities come to an end, especially in a post-COVID environment.
Darren Ponter. One of the claimants who contributed to a review of the Earthquake Commission says it has come too late for people like her, but will hopefully prevent anybody else being treated in the same way as she was. The inquiry's findings, released today, paint a picture of an organisation unprepared to deal with damage on the scale of the 2010 and 2011 Christchurch earthquakes. They highlighted botched assessments and repairs and poor communication. Claimant Susie Hamilton says it took 31 meetings and a 5-year battle with EQC before she was finally able to deal directly with her insurer. She welcomes recommendations in the inquiry that claimants be treated with respect and not be re-traumatised by the claims process. The MP for one of the areas in Vanuatu worst hit by Cyclone Harold says there's a dire need for water and shelter. The Category 5 cyclone tore through the town of Luganville on Tuesday, damaging 70% of the town's buildings. The MP, Matai Seremaya, says hundreds are now homeless and supplies are needed for evacuees. He says contact is still to be made to many rural areas, but assessments from places like Pentecost are grim.
There's a lot of injuries, but all the dispensaries are down and they're all airlifting them to Port Vila. The cyclone passed them at night and it's really bad. From Central Park to the southern part of Pentecost. And many people are living outside at the moment.
Matai Seremaya. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. To sport now. A leading Australian broadcaster is threatening to walk away from Rugby League's NRL because of the way they've gone about a potential restart to the season. The Nine Network, who has a $1.8 billion deal with the NRL, says they're not happy they haven't been properly consulted in the plans to resume the competition. The network is also taking aim at what it calls mismanagement by NRL executives. And a Florida man has filed a lawsuit against golf star Tiger Woods and his caddy Joe LaCava relating to an incident at a tournament in 2018. Brian Barruso alleges he sustained injuries after LaCava shoved him when he tried to take a selfie with Woods in the background. Barruso is seeking more than $30,000 in damages. And that's the news.
This Saturday morning, documentarian Ken Burns on the emotional archaeology he's been engaged in for over 40 years. Veteran travel writer Colin Thubron, he was in New Zealand in 1965. Suddenly not much has changed, perhaps. And Dr. Chris Smith, back to talk about the reasons for that apparent time warp. Join me, Kim Hill, Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now through to midnight tomorrow Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, occasional showers. Clearing in Auckland and Coromandel this evening, becoming mainly fine. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers, some heavy, possibly thundery for the rest of today, gradually clearing tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty. The central high country, also Waited Upper. Scattered showers, possible thunderstorms, clearing from the south later today, becoming fine. Hortowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha, mainly fine. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, isolated showers about Bulla. Clearing to fine in the morning tomorrow, then cloud developing tomorrow evening. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers easing, retreating to the coast and to Stewart Island and coastal Fiordland tomorrow. And at the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, there could be a shower or two there tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you for tuning in. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Prime Minister says we are turning the corner, but to win this marathon battle against COVID-19, we need to keep pushing. For the fourth day running, the number of new cases has continued to drop, with just 29 new cases today. At the halfway mark of the minimum 4-week lockdown, Jacinda Ardern laid out the next measures and steps to prepare the country to move out of level 4. From midnight tonight, everyone arriving from overseas will be quarantined for 14 days. Next week, the government will outline in more detail what level 3 will look like. But a decision won't be made about whether the lockdown will be lifted until just 2 days before it's due to end. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has the story.
At the halfway mark, Jacinda Ardern acknowledged the enormity of what New Zealanders have done.
Kiwis have quietly and collectively implemented a nationwide wall of defence. You are breaking the chain of transmission, and you did it for each other. You have saved lives.
Ms Ardern says New Zealand is on track to meet the most optimistic scenarios, but only if we stick to the plan.
Success does not mean we change the course. Removing restrictions now would allow the virus to spread rapidly once again, and we would be back to the starting line within 2 weeks.
She outlined 3 pillars needed to win: rigorous testing, contact tracing and border controls. From midnight tonight, everyone arriving back from overseas will go into managed isolation in hotels in Auckland for 14 days. Those who are symptomatic will be quarantined, meaning they won't be able to even leave their rooms. Others will be in assisted self-isolation and will be allowed to go outside to get fresh air, but that's all. Ms Ardern says even just one person slipping through the cracks and bringing the virus into New Zealand could see an explosion of cases. She says it will be a mammoth undertaking and says it couldn't have been done any sooner.
Nearly 40,000 New Zealanders have returned home since the 20th of March. That is more than all of the hotel rooms across the country that we could have properly housed people in.
Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield is confident this can be managed properly now.
We have experience now in being able to do this with the evacuees we brought out of Wuhan, and simple, religiously applied, hand washing, use of masks if necessary, and physical distancing will stop infections being spread.
It's not clear how long these border controls will have to be in place.
We benefit from a very large moat, but we need to make the most of it and manage every single person who is coming into the country. I cannot give you an end date for when that will cease.
Ms Ardern says at this stage the government is footing the bill for the isolation hotels, but says this will be reviewed and she isn't ruling out some form of co-payment in the future. National leader Simon Bridges, who has been pushing for these restrictions, says it's better late than never.
It's good. I'm really proud of that National and tens of thousands of New Zealanders have spoken up on this in recent weeks, and that we've got this change. I think it's incredibly important.
He expects the border restrictions will be in place here for some months yet.
I think the reality is to get our borders back up and running, other countries are going to require these sort of measures. And so I think we can see quarantining for some time to come.
Today, Jacinda Ardern also gave a clearer steer on the next steps. Next week, more detailed guidance about what life will look like at level 3 will be released. However, a decision won't be made about whether the lockdown will be lifted until April 20th, 2 days before it's due to finish.
My message to businesses now is prepare now. Prepare now for every alert level. You'll be getting the data that we're making our decisions on in real time, but we need to make sure that we don't move too early. If we do, we risk losing all of the gains we've made.
Mr Bridges says that's not enough notice.
What we're hearing so loud and clear from businesses is that they need a pathway to give them certainty and a confidence. And so to hear from the Prime Minister, look, prepare now and we'll let you know a couple of days before, I don't think is good enough. I think we need to see a more graduated process.
The Ministry of Health is also working on a locally developed app to assist with contact tracing, and is investigating the Singaporean government's Bluetooth-based app, which records interactions between phones if the app is installed. However, this would rely on voluntary uptake from the public.
Yeah, we're very careful about, in any of these developments in health, to balance up people's privacy issues and their confidence that their health information or any information about their health is being safeguarded and only used for that purpose. So we will apply the same level of rigour to these developments.
Dr Bloomfield says it's hard to predict the future and to categorically say we've seen COVID-19's peak, but he is expecting the number of new infections to stay low.
There may be the odd bump up and down. The important thing here is those lab testing numbers, and our intention, as the Prime Minister said, to keep testing widely to be sure that we are finding any cases. So very wide testing of anyone with influenza-like illness symptoms.
And New Zealanders can keep doing their bit to help keep those numbers low by embracing the staycation and sharing Easter weekend firmly inside their bubble. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It is 13 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. EQC was ill-prepared to deal with the widespread damage of the Christchurch earthquakes, and as a consequence its reputation has been left in tatters, with many seeing the Commission as uncaring, miserly and inefficient. That's according to the findings of the inquiry into EQC and its handling of the quake claims in Canterbury and Kaikoura, which have finally been released. The inquiry chair, Dame Sylvia Cartwright, lays out a raft of inadequacies, including EQC not being equipped to handle a mass-scale managed repair program, leading to multiple mistakes, poor staffing decisions and inadequate quality control. And damage assessments were at the root of what claimants told Checkpoint time and time again.
EQC turned up when they had finished. I raised concerns about there being liquefaction under the house, and he told me that he had looked under the floor, and I just said to him, "You're a liar."
It was incredibly frustrating, really disheartening that the government-run organisation could be doing this to me. We trusted the process and the government to look after us, and then we realised that they were not on our side, and that's a bit sad.
They ignored cracks in the foundation. We went from being a rebuild to being undercaps in this maze of delay and denial.
One was a school teacher from Brisbane. The second assessor was a carpenter from Auckland.
10 years on from the earthquakes and I'm no further to getting my claim settled.
And all the time I was with EQC, nobody ever looked at the underfloor.
The first assessment of the damage to our house was totally incompetent.
It took 3 years and going through 8 different people to finally get an engineer to say that the damage to the foundations was earthquake related.
Well, I spoke to Dame Sylvia a short time ago and asked her to describe the way claimants had been treated by EQC.
They were left feeling very demoralised, distressed, sometimes doubly traumatised, first by the earthquakes and then by their experiences with EQC. I have to add, though, that this was largely inadvertent, of course, on EQC's part. It didn't intend to serve its claimants in this way, but that was the result, and it has been a very serious problem. And I should add, it's an ongoing problem. There are still many people in Canterbury, in particular, who feel they've got unresolved claims and feel very distressed by what's happened to them.
This is an organisation that people are supposed to be able to trust and rely on in some of their most toughest moments. So what has it done to the reputation of EQC? For a start, people were fully expecting to be treated with compassion and with good business-like practices, because that had always been the case in the past with EQC, and I heard that from quite a few people. EQC was overwhelmed by the task it was set. I actually think most entities in New Zealand would have been, but the lack of forward planning meant that they were really floundering for a lot of the time. And as a result, in commercial terms, their reputational damage is severe, and it's going to take quite a while to restore that. I know you say it wasn't intentional, but is the way that EQC ended up treating people its biggest mistake here?
Probably, though its systems of assessing damage and making sure that houses were repaired to the level of quality that should be expected was perhaps the most significant problem that the claimants faced in Canterbury. In other parts of New Zealand, experiences were different.
The treatment that some of these people experienced, I mean, you had some claimants on hunger strikes.
That may be so. I didn't specifically hear about that, but certainly there is a residue even nearly a decade after the first major event. There's a residue of extreme distaste for EQC amongst the people and organisations that I met. And I should add that that's not just from people who feel let down. I've discussed my terms of reference with a wide range of groups and people, not just claimants, and even former EQC staff and others who were closely involved in the repair and rebuild project spoke of their feelings of being let down by EQC.
In your recommendations, you address the issue of treatment of people. You say that claimants should be treated respectfully, fairly and professionally with a sensitivity to post-disaster pressures. You also say that communication from EQC should be honest, transparent and empathetic. Do you really have to tell a Crown entity to be honest?
I didn't intend to suggest that they were being dishonest, but it should be open. And my main concern in that area was the risk-averse approach that EQC took to providing claimants with their own information. And this is an issue with a number of areas of New Zealand life, of course, that the privacy provisions in our legislation make people very risk-averse. And so in the end, people were having to take official information requests to get information about the progress with their own repairs on their own properties, and that is clearly ridiculous. So that's the sort of mismanagement that I was directing my comments at.
You also have suggested that they should treat people with respect and fairness. Again, is that really something that we have to tell a Crown entity to do?
No, but don't forget that they had to pull in literally hundreds of staff who had not had the training that their core staff had, and they were not always ideally suited to the role. when the first earthquake hit in September of 2009, there were 22 staff in EQC, and I think at the peak it reached about 1,600 people. So you can see that they had a lot of people who weren't trained adequately, and they could be quite difficult for the claimants to deal with.
Or people who weren't trained at all, Dame Sylvia, or people who were not trained at all doing very specialised work that people's lives basically hinged on.
Yes, they did have some vestigial training, but it wasn't very much in the area of assessments in particular. There were other areas where the training was no real problem, but assessments, in my view, was the biggest area where mistakes were made, serious mistakes and ongoing mistakes were made.
Is it fair to say that that element of it was an absolute disaster from EQC's point of view?
I wouldn't put that word on it, but it was certainly a very serious problem.
How would you characterise it?
A very serious problem, and it could have been anticipated better. And again, I have to qualify my comments by saying that EQC had not planned for nor anticipated a role in running and organising one of the biggest repair and rebuilding projects that New Zealand has ever faced. It had done some preliminary exercises to test its capability in much, much smaller earthquakes, numbering in the tens, not the thousands, and had decided it wasn't equipped, didn't have the right skills and expertise, and was doubtful that it was within its legislative mandate. So it hadn't planned for that. It had informed government of that too. It hadn't planned for it at all, so it wasn't ready to take on such a massive project.
And that is Dame Sylvia Cartwright, who's the chair of that public EQC inquiry. It's the biggest day of his career for Countdown's head of produce. Today he's taken receipt of his biggest ever pick of fresh fruit and vegetables. Think millions of bananas, potatoes in quantities you've never seen, and avocados, so many avocados, a real estate of avocados, if you will. Producer Bridget Burke spoke to Grant Robinson, the man that's in charge of keeping your carrots fresh.
Massive day for produce. So we've got 80 tonne of bananas going through the DC. We've got over 87,000 heads of broccoli. We've got over 65,000 bags of potatoes going out the door, and just over 90,000 avocados. So a huge day.
How many pieces of toast would you need to smash 90,000 avocados?
I don't think there's enough bread in the country.
I'm wondering how many houses that represents too. Hey, so logistically that must be tricky. You've got to keep all this stuff cold and fresh for days. How do you do that?
Yeah, so the products picked today, it gets held in at the right temperature in our DC for tomorrow for the public holiday, and it gets distributed out to our stores first thing Saturday morning. It'll be on the shelves. It's
interesting that you are taking receipt of this massive haul of produce on the eve of Good Friday, when in fact that's the one day you're closed.
Yeah, so that's the reason we do that, is so that we can give our team and the DCs a day off tomorrow. So they have a really big day today, then they get a day off tomorrow, and then they're back into it on Saturday. As head of produce, this is, potentially the zenith for you, to take receipt of your biggest ever haul of fresh fruit and vegetables. Where to now? I mean, the only way is down, isn't it, for you, Grant? That's true. I mean, I've just been talking about it. It's the biggest day of my career. I've been in produce 36 years, and it's the biggest day of my career, and it's been spectacular to watch.
What have you tasted?
I've been eating a few mandarins today, and man, they're good.
And the bananas?
I haven't eaten any bananas because we bring them in a little bit greener, so they're nice and they're at the right stage on Saturday when they're in store.
I've seen some people complain that a couple of carrots in the fridge, after a few days, they get soft and attract black spots. What's the deal there?
What I've been doing, if you want to keep your carrots fresh, you want to put them in a sealed plastic container. Once you put them in your fridge, they'll keep for a week, no problem at all.
What does represent best value right now in terms of fruit and vegetables?
Yeah, right now it's got to be broccoli. We have got oodles of broccoli. It's $1.50 a head, and the quality is sensational.
That was Grant Robinson, Master of Fruit and Vegetables, not to be confused with the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson. And he's taking the biggest possession of the biggest fruit and veggie shipment into Countdown, so that'll be ready for you when the stores open again. A lot of you getting in touch about Easter weekend. It is a weird Easter weekend. Murray says, stay at home, everybody. I live on a busy intersection in Auckland. These past 2 weeks, it's been quiet. This afternoon, it's been noticeably busier. I reckon it's busier out there too, Murray. Cars with 3 or 4 people carrying children and families cannot be essential service delivery. We are at a minimum only halfway there. Stay at home, says Murray. On the issue of the inquiry into EQC, which was released today, headed up by Dame Sylvia Cartwright, Andrew says, I expect Jerry Brownlee at the least to resign for this debacle under his watch, even if unintended. With the extraordinary powers the government of the time invoked were not used well at all, while the problems were abundantly obvious. Thanks for getting in touch. Supermarkets are closed tomorrow for the first time since lockdown began, and despite the big queues today, we're being assured there are plenty of Easter eggs to go around. Katie Doyle reports on an Easter like no other.
It's official. The Easter Bunny will still be allowed to visit New Zealand homes this weekend. His work has got the seal of approval from top brass.
We do consider both the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny to be essential workers. But as you can imagine at this time, of course, they're going to be potentially quite busy at home with their family as well and their own bunnies. And so I say to the children of New Zealand, if the Easter Bunny doesn't make it to your household, then we have to understand that it's a bit difficult at the moment for the bunny to perhaps get everywhere.
It wasn't quite business as usual for Tracy Melville-Smith from the Remarkable Chocolate Company this year, but she was determined none of her customers would miss out this Easter. Working from home, Miss Melville-Smith has spent the first 2 weeks of lockdown fulfilling supermarket orders and online orders to those who haven't been able to get to a supermarket or those wanting to send gifts.
It's people out of town. People can, in the regions, get amazing quality, beautiful New Zealand goods, and that makes me happy that people that don't have quite the store ranges that we have in Auckland can get access to the good stuff.
Ms Melville-Smith says being in quarantine shouldn't stop anyone from celebrating over Easter weekend, so long as they don't pop their bubble.
We're not being punished. This isn't prison. This isn't the war. Some people are talking, about how going without is part of it, but I just don't think that's necessarily the goal of it.
Figures from Countdown show that last year, New Zealanders chewed through about 3 empty Boeing 747 planes worth of chocolate. That's 530 tonnes. With supermarkets closed for Good Friday tomorrow, there is still time to shop on Saturday and Sunday, with supermarkets open. Countdown spokesperson Kiri Hannafin says despite the long queues today, there is no need to panic. Supermarket shelves are well stocked.
I can assure you that stocks are looking good. I was in the store this morning getting my own Easter supplies, and there was lots to go around, and absolutely all of our stores across New Zealand are open on Saturday. So if you don't get a chance to visit us today, we're back trading on Saturday, and most of our stores are also open on Sunday. So there's plenty of opportunities for everybody to do their shopping over the weekend.
The warehouse, which has been closed since the lockdown began, was allowed this week to sell Easter eggs as an essential item online. It says some eggs were offered to staff when the lockdown began, while others are now being donated to Women's Refuge and Kiwi Harvest. The chief executive of Women's Refuge, Dr. Ange Jury, says it's been a hard time for some families, and this will be a small source of joy.
There's a hell of a lot of families out there at the moment who are receiving grocery parcels from us and from a range of other social services. So having Easter eggs that are part of those parcels is pretty cool.
The remaining warehouse chocolate stock is still on the shelves and will be available to customers when the lockdown ends. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
And just some time for your feedback before we go. Karen has got in touch to say Jacinda and the team are nothing short of amazing. The credibility and amount of logistical work that has gone into making us safe, helping us eat and survive is just incredible. That includes a huge amount of work involved in setting up a full quarantine border control infrastructure that has been done in weeks when it would normally have taken months. The fact that this woman has stood up and explained, answered nauseating repeated questions and nurtured us, including including the Tooth Fairy and Easter Bunny, through the last 6 weeks is nothing short of incredible. Thank you, Jacinda, says Karen. Karen, thanks for getting in touch, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Don't forget, you can catch up on our stories online, in particular the video packages. Our news teams will be on deck over the weekend, keeping you up to date with everything that is going on. That's all we've got time for. Enjoy your Easter weekend, as strange as it may seem. We're back with you next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. From midnight, all travellers arriving from overseas will be put into either quarantine or managed isolation at an approved facility for 14 days. The Prime Minister insists a tight border is key to keeping COVID-19 out of New Zealand. Air New Zealand says up to 1,460 cabin crew jobs will be axed due to the pandemic, and New Zealanders stuck on a cruise ship in Uruguay, where more than half of the people on board have tested positive for the coronavirus, will be allowed to board an Australian evacuation flight. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
We know that for a virus to replicate, it needs a cell. It needs to hijack that cell's machinery in order to replicate. If you've got a CD8 T cell that can come along and kill it, it can stop that virus replicating.
On Our Changing World tonight, how does our immune system fight the COVID-19 virus?
If you think of it as an orchestra and there's lots